This morning our conversation will be centering on mixed media messaging, but we would be drilling down to conversations around the tax reforms, which has been designed to enhance revenue generation and foster economic growth. However, the effectiveness of these reforms often hinges on how they are communicated, as we have seen in the week under review, between how all of those messages have had to hit individuals at their various screens in their homes. We have had to deal with mixed messaging characterized by contradictory, bias, and unclear narratives from various media platforms, which has played significant role in the way people have interpreted these messages and ultimately whether or not they have offered support for this very important public policy. And we understand that it can lead to misinformation, public distrust, resistance to reforms, ultimately undermining policy objectives. Today, we want to analyze the impact of mixed media messaging on the Nigerian tax reforms, and we have joining us in the studio. At this point, I have the opportunity to digress from the script. One who was a former boss, who is a media expert, and was until very recently the chairman of the Daily Trust editorial board, Dr. Suleiman. Suleiman, it's a pleasure to have you join us in the studio.
Thank you for having me, Sunday.
You know the thing they say about dynamites, they come in very small packs, but when they explode, that you understand the effect they can have in an environment.
Thank you.
When the whole conversation around the tax reform started, we were excited. Anybody who had operated around Nigeria and had to deal with multiple taxation, especially if you run a small business, would be excited that there was what appeared to be a genuine effort to harmonize these tax practices and give some kind of relief to private operators, especially or individuals in Nigeria. And I mean, when they started off, it was even more exciting when they talked about shrinking the number of taxes to just about 10 and harmonizing corrections and removing all of the harassments that come with the way taxes are collected, the mundane tax practices in Nigeria. But shortly after, the conversation took a different twist, you know, with all of the reforms that are proposed, and very quickly these proposals were sent to the National Assembly. And before we knew it, the opposition started, first with the Northern Elders Group in a meeting, and thereafter the Governors Forum, headed by the Vice President, had called for a halt, but very swiftly the presidency resisted and said let it go through the gamut of the process of lawmaking, and thereafter we've seen all shades of opinion, different media platforms, you know, highlighting different things as far as this bill are concerned. For the average Nigerian, at some point you are completely lost at what to even think about this bill. And I mean, and this is coming at a time where the government has lost a lot of trust from most of the policies that had reeled out, that has occasioned, you know, very heavy sufferings on Nigeria. As a professional and as a Nigerian, how do you distill all of this messaging from most of the media platforms you have had to consume their messages with regards to what exactly are the true positions of things, what people should know, and how do we move forward with this conversation?
Thank you very much, Sunday. I think this illustrates two things. First, it shows the incompetence within Nigerian government itself, particularly with respect to policy making, but also the relative lack of capacity in our media as well. So unfortunately, the two have worked together, you know, to set the country almost on fire, as we were discussing over this issue. Why do I say there is incompetence in government? The idea of policy communication starts right from policy design, right the time that you are thinking of policy, particularly a policy that you already know had always been controversial. Nobody who is an adult and been following the news in Nigeria would not have known that any issue relating to tax or VAT, you know, has a contentious or at least some contentions around it. So you already know this. This means that right from the time that you are doing the policy, you are sitting down to design the policy, which is the job of that Presidential Fiscal Policy Committee, you know. That's the time for them to map out who their stakeholders are. Who do they, even before you know what the policy will turn out to be in the end, because it doesn't matter. The politics of policy doesn't care about the policy itself. It cares about what people feel, how the policy will affect them. So the policy itself is not as important as the stakeholders that, so they failed to do that, Secondly, the Nigerian governors, the Northern Governors Forum in particular, which should actually be a research institution. If the Northern Governors Forum has any value at all, it should be a sort of think tank, a policy research, conducting research about issues that pertain development, social, economic development in northern Nigeria. If you have something like that for Nigeria as a whole, the same thing. If you have for southern governors, the same thing, and so on and so forth. So you would expect them to do a lot of research on this before just coming out and saying, oh, this policy will not favor northern Nigeria. So from there, the frame was already set for how the media was going to report the issue. Do you understand? From that failing by the committee itself for not actively involving important stakeholders to the policy they were designing right from the beginning, but also once the Northern Governors Forum reacted to it and reacted without proper research. And I say this because I have read the bills, and I have written about them on my column this very week.
So how would you, sorry, Lilian, how would you then describe what the media has done with this piece of information? Was this purely gaslighting? What appears to be the position of a few, or they had attempted to also put that information from the point of knowledge?
Yeah. If you say gaslighting, you'll probably be right, but I would say it's largely lack of capacity. You remember in the newsroom, I've always said, our media as a whole, I'm not singling out individual media or individual reporters, our media system as a whole, we're very strong on reporting the news, but very weak on reporting policy. Because policy requires a whole different kind of capacity. You have to understand the policy first before you turn it into news, and that requires, this, a sort of skill set a lot of our reporters, a lot of our media organizations don't have. What this means is that first, it gives opportunity for pseudo-intellectuals and pseudo-pundits and all kinds of people who call themselves experts in the country to just take over the public space and push out all kinds of information. I've seen a lot of this, how this will damage the North, how and so on and so forth. A lot of it is misinformed. That's one. Secondly, it also means the media is not able to do its job of being the one at the forefront of informing the people. Indeed, the very idea of media and democracy depends on being a forum for policy debate. You cannot be an effective forum for policy debate if you don't understand the policies themselves. So, in my view, I have noticed that, and like I said, I actually read your story. For example, what the media ought to have done is to take the VAT, because that's the most contentious issue in the entire policy. The derivation. Take the VAT figures, and they're available everywhere. That's right. The VAT figures for 2023, 2022, 2021. All of these are available. They are the most recent figures in VAT. And then use the formulas in the two different scenarios and then play them out. For example, in the current existing VAT structure, derivation is 20%, based on where it comes. You have 50% equality of states, and then 30% based on population. This is what works now, and it is based on this that states receive their significant portion of VAT allocation from the FAAC, right? Yes. Then you now have a new formula that says, okay, let's change this derivation from 20% to 60%. And this is the most contentious part of the most contentious aspect of the entire thing as well. Do you understand? So what you need to do is, okay, put the figures. 60% derivation, how much will Lagos get in the end? How much would Kano get in the end? How much will Adamawa get in the end? I did this. And I find that using the 2023 data only, and I find that the argument actually is not between northern states and southern states. The argument is in fact between big states and small states. Anyone who understands federalism as a concept and practice will quickly understand how important this is. In the history of federalism itself, the idea of how small states can be secure in the company of larger states is the most significant debate. This is why in the US, for example, you have this electoral college in the first place. Because without the electoral college, it means if you can win New York and California, you win the presidency. Do you understand? So it's a serious issue and goes at the heart of the federation itself. But it is not a northern state and southern state issue. For example, in last year, 2023, the current structure, the top 10 earners, those who got the money, not those who generated, but those who got the allocation from VAT, the top 10, there are 5 northern states among them, including Jigawa, including Bauchi, and so on. Jigawa is not a state where you would expect a large amount of VAT to come from, or Bauchi and so on. But because of their relative population, Katsina is also there. You understand? You know, Kano, Kaduna, and so on. But even the southern states are also like that.
That's right.
Lagos, Anambra, in the whole of southeast, Anambra is the largest. You understand? Delta is also large in the south. Right. This is it. Whereas there are other smaller states like FCT, like Bayelsa, Kebbi, who are actually among the top generators of VAT. In terms of how much they generate, but who are missing in the top 10 when it comes to allocation. So the argument has nothing to do with north versus south, but some northern states that are poor and fewer in population, and southern states that are poor and fewer in population, those ones tend to receive lower VAT revenues. The northern states that are larger in population and relatively richer, like Kaduna and Kano, also tend to have higher VAT allocation. The same in the south. So you have Oyo there, but not Ogun, which is near Lagos.
It was smaller.
Do you understand? And so on. So this is exactly what has been happening. But once it has been presented as a north versus south argument, and there's no argument that is sweeter among Nigerians than north versus south argument. Then the rest is just confusion.
Okay, talking about the role, I'm glad you mentioned the role of the media. Before you came in, I told Sunday, I said, I don't think I saw any media house that actually did break this down. I was able to understand the full breakdown from a man on Twitter who spent 24 minutes making a video on it in pidgin English, breaking it down so that people can understand, and it was quite informative. And coming back here, people were calling in to ask questions and they had little or no knowledge about it. So seeing how this played out now, where does this keep the media, especially when it comes to building public trust and educating Nigerians on policy? How bad, what kind of light has this shown on the media at this point in time?
To be honest, that again also is part of the problem. Because I saw videos like yours, those who did theirs in Hausa language, so that it can appeal to a wider population, at least within northern Nigeria. But it was entirely misinformed about the bill. So I don't know what this person says.
It was very clear. It was just explaining the VAT and the derivation. Just this is what it is, and hands out.
As a media person, I'm skeptical unless I have seen something, evidence first. So I would say that once I see that, then I can say, okay, whether this is the kind of change that we need. Because a lot of people who viewed the video in Hausa that I'm talking about also held it as being the best that they had viewed, and the one that most explains the situation, particularly because it was in Hausa language. So I don't think the language used is whether Pidgin or Hausa is what's important. Infographics, I was saying to myself that, oh my God, all these people needed is alligator. To just break this down for people in terms of, okay, currently,
that was exactly what the video did, with a blackboard and a chalk, breaking it down. This is the amount. Yes.
Thank you very much. This is what Lagos gets now. So if we go on 60% derivation, Lagos will reduce, because even among these top 10, the gap between Lagos and the rest is still crazy.
Crazy, yeah.
That's right.
because Lagos had 142 billion last year. You know, Kano, which was the third, had about 60. You know, Rivers, which was the second, had about 70 or is it 80 or 90? I don't remember the figure for Lagos. So what's the point? Kano has double that of the next state following. I mean, Lagos has double that of the next state following, for obvious reasons. So, and a lot of the economic activity in Lagos itself is not Lagos per se, it's the federal government of Nigeria. This is a fair argument. The entirety of Victoria Island, the entirety of the island itself is largely based not on Lagos business per se, but on the federal government of Nigeria, as we now know it, has been investing in Lagos since 1860.
True.
So we are talking about over 150 years, you know, 160 years of investment that has continued. That is also something. So what I would have expected organizations like the Northern Governors Forum to do, to say, oh, okay, we have seen that this is where the discrepancy is. Because up till now, we still don't know what that 60% derivation will look like with all across all the states once we map it out. We don't know who will be disadvantaged and who will be advantaged. And we need to know that in order to understand where the bill is heading. And it is rather unfortunate also that the committee didn't even do that themselves.
Yeah, I was just coming to that.
Thank you.
As we wrap up, how much, as a governance person yourself, outside media studies, how much of distrust in the entire governance structure did you think took impact on this conversation?
Thank you.
And why did you also get the sense that it appears that we're in a hurry to get somewhere, whether or not people understood where we were going to? We just wanted people to trust the process, don't even criticize, let arrive at the destination and you see the result. What did you make of all of that?
There are three things. Number one, hubris. There are some people in this country who believe that they know everything. So once they come into government, the rest of us, we are fools, we don't know anything. They wear suit and tie. In fact, I wanted to title my article this week that it's not about suit and tie. You know, you can have all the suits and tie in this world and still be an idiot. I have always maintained it. So there's that hubris to say, okay, I know everything. If you look at the Mr. Oloyedega, what's his name? The Taiwo Oyodele, the head. He has been aggressively, and I give him credit, you know, for that, aggressively communicating ideas into from the bills out in public. But that exactly proves that it is the ideas of one person that largely, you know, the outcome of the bill. That is actually evidence that there was not enough consultation around it. So when the Northern Governors argue about a lack of consultation, I agree with that. You know, so there's hubris. Secondly, I also feel that the distrust that Nigerians have, you're entirely correct about that, about what the government intentions are, particularly when they were rushing the bill. The reason they are rushing it, I don't think is because they want to cheat anybody. Or I believe that they too don't understand the bill enough. That's exactly what I've been trying to say. And that if they want to understand it, this is how to do it. This 60%, take it, map it onto previous figures, and let's see how it will affect Enugu and Jigawa. Let's see how it will affect Yobe and Ekiti. And it's as simple as that. And everybody will see, you know, in graphics, in simple graphics, even if they can read. Once they have eyes, they can see how, because it's graphs, you know, and so on. So we all don't know enough about the bills as they stand, you know. So let's see how that will play out, you know. But the reason why they wanted to do it is because one of the major objectives of the bill is to expand the tax net. You know, the income that the government receives from tax in Nigeria is small, and that's also a fact. Among all 33 African countries, Nigeria, and you know, the only one lower than Nigeria is Equatorial Guinea. You can imagine how, in any economic index, Nigeria is being compared to Equatorial Guinea. Please, Equatorial Guinea is not up to Nasarawa State.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, so the average is about 15 point, plus of the GDP. Nigeria is 6 point something. It's so woeful. So they want to expand the tax base for the country, and they have already stated in those bills that it starts from 2015 January. So you can see that, for me, that's the reason why they are rushing the bills. I don't think it's because they have an ulterior motive that but then again, government has always lied in Nigeria. So the experience people have is that a person who says A and does B. So if people believe that it is because they have ulterior motives, you cannot blame them also.
True.
But
all right, I wish we had time to do to keep Dr. Suleiman further in the studio. With Dr. Suleiman, you don't know how time flies. He's taken us through a lot and has tried to explain the reasons for what appears to be the mass distrust, even in the face of what appears to be positive in some sense. And you can't excuse Nigeria's cynicism. Their experience with previous government, including the current government, is not one that has been completely palatable. We have had the distinguished opportunity to have in our midst again a media scholar, a media consultant, a student of governance, and a leader always. Dr. Suleiman in the studio this morning. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. As you were speaking, I was almost thinking maybe I'm not the one you are describing, but thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.